Prepare to have your health questions answered here on Safe, Effective Natural Solutions with Dr. Todd Binkley, owner of Binkley Healing Center in downtown Ventura. Now, here's Dr. Todd.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Todd Binkley, practitioner of functional medicine and non-force doctor of chiropractic. Do you know somebody who has depression or anxiety, attention and deficit disorder, cognitive impairment, dementia, brain fog, dizziness, one of the autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis or lupus or Hashimoto's thyroiditis, low thyroid from autoimmunity, or rheumatoid arthritis, one of the inflammatory gut conditions? You know somebody that has weight that they can't get rid of, or fatigue that is unexplained. These are all things that can be caused or dramatically aggravated or contributed to by exposure to toxic heavy metals. Last week's episode was all about heavy metal toxicity. This week's episode is a continuation of that. We're going to talk some more about heavy metal toxicity, exposure to and body burden of lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and uranium. These things are called heavy metals because they weigh more and they persist more in your system than other types of metals, other minerals, and there is no safe level of these things. And we're all exposed to them, but we're exposed to varying amounts of them. We're not all exposed to the same amount. We all vary in our genetic capacity to flush these things out as we're exposed to them, and we all vary in the amount of regular intake of essential nutrients, especially essential minerals like zinc and chromium and iron and magnesium and calcium, etc. Essential minerals that are important for all aspects of our health are also important for flushing out heavy metals. You need more of certain essential minerals to flush out the bad heavy metals. So if you're not getting them, then you could be exposed to the same amount of lead or mercury or arsenic as someone right next to you working at the same job with the same toxic exposure, for example. And, you get sicker than them because you're not flushing the stuff out as fast as they are. How much water you drink every day can even contribute to that. So it's a complex thing, and that's why we do testing. Everybody's different. The only way to know for sure what your body is burdened with is to do a test for heavy metals, which is either a hair test or a urine test. The best lab in the country to do that testing, the most reliable that I've been using for 25 years or so, is Doctor's Data. We either collect a hair sample or a urine sample, send it in the lab, and a week to 10 days we get the results back and find out what is in your system, what amounts of these things is your body flushing out. It's a little bit different than a blood test. You can't directly measure the amount of these things in your body like you can measure something in the blood. You can measure them. They do blood tests for lead and mercury, but they're kind of useless. They're only going to have a significant amount of lead in your bloodstream if you're in one of those places like Flint, Michigan, where there's, just dramatic amounts of it in the water, or you're having some kind of acute exposure from being in the military or working in some kind of an industry with heavy exposure, ceramics manufacturer, certain construction materials like tile, has a lot of heavy metals like arsenic, cadmium, lead in the glazes on tiles and sometimes in the ceramics themselves. So these heavy metals, why are they in all of these things? Heavy metals make beautiful colors in paint. Cadmium red, and I think it's uranium that's in yellow. I forget which is in which, but really beautiful colors of tile and oil paints for artists. Colorful paints that they paint toys from China, especially, are notorious for having lead in them. And then heavy metals also make glazes and finishes, paints, any kind of material that you use to finish something, a surface of something. They make those things harder. They make tiles themselves harder, more, less likely to crack or break. Just like leaded glass was harder. Leaded glass, which, you don't want to drink out of, especially any warm liquid out of, because it's more likely to leach the lead out, or drink anything acidic like orange juice or tomato juice out of a leaded glass, because it's likely to pull. It is a crystal, so leaded glass isn't a common huge source of exposure to lead, but I'm just using it to illustrate a point. Industries put these heavy metals in things purposefully, on purpose, because they make things harder. So The only way to find out your body burden of these things is to be tested. So when we test, you get the results back, and we do specific things to help you flush these things out, like Chlorella I talked about last week. Anyone can go to nuts.com, which is a website that sells nuts, nuts.com. But nuts.com is great because they have really high-quality products that are in vacuum-sealed bags, fresh, reasonable prices, a pound of Chlorella. I used to sell Chlorella in capsules. A bottle of 90 or 100 capsules was a little over $20. You can get an entire pound of Chlorella powder, top quality powder in a vacuum-sealed pack, stays fresh, for $18. So I encourage anybody who's willing to and interested in, as just a general health habit, who's willing to do a greens juice. If you're already making some kind of protein shake in the morning and you want to add a little something extra to it, or if you've already bought some kind of super greens powder from the health food store, or you like drinking wheatgrass shots or any green juice, use Chlorella powder instead, because it has all the benefits of any other greens juice: protein, lots of minerals. Chlorella is almost 60% protein by weight. Most forms, it varies a little bit. It's always over 50%. It's usually in the order of 58, 59% protein. I've seen some sources tested up to almost 80%. Anyway, there's a lot of protein in it, and every mineral known to man, all the minerals that you need: iron, magnesium, potassium, sodium, phosphorus, selenium, chromium. So all the big 5 main minerals and all the trace minerals, almost all of them are in Chlorella in abundance. So it's just a good extra thing to add to your diet if you like, and ongoingly flush out the inevitable exposure to lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and uranium that we're all exposed to. So here's a case. I had a 35-year-old man with debilitating dizziness, nausea, and some neck pain. He'd been to the ER 5 times in the previous 4 months. He would wake up and have to sit on the edge of his bed for a half hour, 20 to 30 minutes, to wait for the room to stop spinning. He would get up and feel like he was drunk, and he didn't drink at all, ever. And he was eating a pretty good diet. He was a fit, healthy man, had a great job. And I did an extensive case history on him, and he insisted that he had not been exposed to any, he wasn't aware of any exposure to chemical toxins. But I had a pretty good idea from some other things that he said in his case history that he was probably exposed to heavy metals, and we tested him for him. And I also tested him for chemical toxins and mold toxins because he was a mess. He had MRIs, CAT scans. He'd been to a neurologist. The neurologist told him to see a psychiatrist. He really appreciated that. It was in his head. It was in his brain, but it wasn't a psychological condition. It was heavy metals in his brain. So your brain is the most sensitive organ to any nutrient deficiency and any toxic exposure. And mercury and lead and aluminum and some other toxic metals are actually stored in the fat of your brain tissue. When your body has an acute exposure to any heavy metal or any other toxin that it can't figure out how to flush out of, and immediately it will endeavor to flush as much of it out as it can through the kidneys and the colon, just like it flushes out all other waste. When you go to the bathroom, you're getting rid of that stuff through the kidneys and the colon. But what your body cannot flush out, for whatever reason, the reason that heavy metals are bad, it's usually trace amounts. It's tiny amounts of them that you're exposed to, but your body has a great difficulty flushing them out through the normal means. And so after they're floating around, creating havoc, irritating your immune system, and interfering with metabolism of other nutrients, burdening your body's smart. It knows that these things, you need to get this stuff out of your gut and out of your bloodstream, so it shoves them into fat cells. What it cannot get rid of, it's still circulating around in your bloodstream, re-exposing all of your cells, especially your brain. Not good. Your body's smart. It will shove those toxins into fat cells to get them out of circulation. The problem with that is then they stay there, stuck in those fat cells forever. Sometimes small amounts of it come out when you sweat, but a lot of it just gets stuck there forever, and that's why it doesn't show up on a blood test. You're only going to see acute exposure. Anybody who says, I did a blood test, I don't have any heavy metals. Well, that's ridiculous because they're not in your blood. The burden that you carry from long-term exposure, which is everyone has long-term exposure, they're unavoidable in the environment. That only shows up on a hair test or a urine test that tests for The hair test measures what your body's excreting from fat cells through your skin. And the urine test, using a chelating agent, can directly bind to these things that are stored in fat cells and escort them to the kidneys where they're flushed out and will show up in the urine. So once you identify your body burden, then you can take things like chlorella, things like modified citrus pectin, extra nutrients. So there are specific combinations of mainly minerals, also some B vitamins, that compete for binding sites and help your body flush out the bad minerals. So for example, iodine competes with uranium. You may have heard after the Fukushima nuclear plant meltdown, there was a scarcity, a shortage, a run on iodine supplements all over the world. People were buying up iodine because it helps your body flush out and protect your protect your thyroid and other tissues that have a lot of iodine. Breast tissue in women has a lot of iodine in it, and taking extra iodine can protect your thyroid and other body, your brain, other tissues, help reduce your risk of getting cancer from that exposure. It doesn't protect you from radiation; it just protects you from the effects of uranium. So there are several other examples. It's different. So that's why we do the testing. You may need some extra minerals in addition to eating a healthy diet and taking a good multivitamin. That's one of the reasons I recommend that everyone take a good multivitamin, because the minerals in a good 4-capsule-a-day absorbable, bioavailable mineral product will also help your body flush out these metals that we're all exposed to all the time. So we come up with a strategy to flush those things out and then retest. And it usually takes about 6 months to see a difference on a hair test or a urine test, sometimes a year. It's a slow process, and you don't want to flush these things out too fast. If you've ever heard of somebody doing some kind of a cleanse that they heard about somewhere, oh, I'm going to do a liver cleanse, or I got this powder I'm going to take every day for a week or 10 days or a month. Sometimes those things are good, but without testing, it can be dangerous. The bottom line is you don't want to, these things are in storage in fat cells. To remove them, you have to pull them out of the fat cells into your bloodstream, where they will expose healthy cells to the damaging effects of those heavy metals until they're eliminated, until they're flushed out through the kidneys and the colon, or you can directly flush them out by sweating. So anytime you take something that's going to help your body flush out these toxins, you have to remember that it's pulling them out of storage in fat cells, where they will enter your bloodstream and be in your bloodstream for hopefully just a few hours. Or if you're doing it incorrectly, then they can persist in your bloodstream for days or longer. That's not good. And so that's the name of the game, is you only want to pull this stuff out as fast as you can then excrete it. So you pull it out of fat cells, it's in your bloodstream for a few hours, a little bit longer, and then flushed out, eliminated through urine and feces. So if you try to pull it out too fast, it can make you sick. And you can feel that. And sometimes we have to adjust doses accordingly if and when that happens. So that's why it's a slow process. That's why it takes 6 months to a year, sometimes 2 years, to totally reduce to a minimum level your body's exposure to heavy metals. Usually if we do a hair test, that's a simple test, doesn't require a chelating agent. It's less expensive than doing the urine test, which you always have to do two. You have to get a baseline before you use the chelating agent that pulls them out of storage, and then a second one to compare it to. Anyway, I often do hair tests on people to identify it. With that, you always have to do at least 3 tests, inevitably, because the goal is to increase excretion. So when we do initial test, we see what's coming out now. It's usually 6 months later, sometimes a year, we do another test, and we expect to see increased amount of things coming out. We've been giving your body extra nutrients so it can flush out whatever's in there. So we expect to see some of the things on the test result to go up, because the test is measuring what you're excreting, what you're flushing out, that's showing up in your hair, what you're flushing out through the hair follicles and sweat glands in the skin. And then we do a third test to make sure that it's gone up and then come back down. So we have to see an amount. We have to see it either go down, or we need to see it. What will usually happen is it will go up first, more is flushing out, and then it will go down. And then we know we've reduced your total body burden. And if it's gone up and down but still high, obviously we need to continue, sometimes test a 4th time, whatever it takes and whatever time it takes to get the as much flushed out as possible, slowly and safely. I'm Dr. Todd Binkley. You're listening to Safe, Effective, Natural Solutions to Almost Any Health Challenge. I love questions. Send me a question. When this show is on the air, if I'm not with a patient, I'll have my email available. Email me. Some people like to call. You can find my phone number on my website. My website is binkleyhealingcenter.com. My email is drbinkley@binkleyhealingcenter.com. And you can find my phone number on my website. I don't give it out because I can't answer phone calls quickly. I want to get back to you as quickly as possible. So the fastest way to get a response from me is to send me an email. Or you can send me a text as well. But I love to answering questions. So send me a question anytime. My phone is always off. My phone ringer is always off. That's why I don't answer the phone when you call me. But if you want to talk on the phone, just leave a text or an email saying, please call me. And I'd be happy to call you back and chat on the phone as well. So send your questions in. Who do you know that has some of these symptoms, who has a weight that they can't get rid of, or unexplained fatigue? So this I started talking about this 35-year-old man a little bit while ago. Been to the hospital several times. Nobody could figure out what was causing his debilitating dizziness. And I did. He even had an MRI done on his brain, and it was clear. Well, I did a second MRI with contrast. And the MRI with contrast showed that he had a thickening of the mucosa, the lining of his intestines. Of his sinuses. Thickening of the lining of the sinuses, the mucosa of the sinuses, right above the bottom of the sinuses, right on top of the brain. So right next to the brain where he's inhaling, the part of your brain where the sensors are for the sense of smell, the nerve endings for the sense of smell, the tissue around that was thickened. Well, the only thing that causes that is inhaling something that irritates that tissue over and over and over again. A chronic exposure to something that's irritating that tissue is what will cause it to become inflamed and thickened. And so I did some further testing and identified there's this tremendous exposure to chemical, mold, and heavy metal toxins. We put him on a program to help his body flush those things out, including chlorella and a bunch of nutrients and pectisol, some modified citrus pectin, and a few other things to help his body heal and repair damaged cells and the inflammation to his brain and flush out the heavy metals. And, for about a month and a half, he felt no different. It was, I told him, you're going to have to be patient. You can't just pull these things out instantly. But after about 6 weeks, he started to feel a lot better. He was able to go back to work. It would take less time for the dizziness to go away. And after about 3 months, it was almost gone. He still had a little bit of lingering nausea and a little bit of problem with some inflammation in his gut that, about 6 months later, everything was completely gone. But, he was feeling almost as good as new after about 3 months. And that's partly because he was otherwise fit and healthy, because he had a lot of exposure to these toxins. And we definitely did not get rid of all the toxins that he needed to get rid of. He's still working on flushing some of that stuff out. But people have this, everyone listening has lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and uranium in your body. I've never tested anyone who had zero. It just doesn't happen. It's ubiquitous in the environment. We can't avoid it. But if you just reduce the burden, it's when you have a lot of it, or when you have an extra amount of it that's getting flushed around in your bloodstream or building up in your brain or some other part of your body that's causing symptoms. If we just reduce it, an amount, I don't know what the percentage, maybe 10, 15, 20%. It's very difficult to quantify that. But the bottom line is we don't have to you hear me saying, it takes a year or two to completely reduce your body burden to a minimum. It doesn't take that long to feel better. When somebody has exposure to these things and we identify a burden of toxic heavy metals on testing, it usually takes 2-3 months before you start feeling noticeably better or significantly better. And, on average, somewhere between 3 and 6 months, sometimes a little bit longer, to basically feel as good as new. It still takes time to ongoingly after that, continuing to take some things to flush out the metals and follow-up testing to make sure that you're as clean as you want to be and need to be. So obesity, people who have unexplained weight gain or who are eating a good diet and exercising and just can't lose that last 10, 20, 30 pounds is a lot of times the reason for that is because those extra fat cells, wherever they are in your body, it tends to be the hardest part to shift is usually around the belly, the abdomen. That's the worst fat also for a whole bunch of reasons. It's a subject of a whole other talk because those fat cells in your gut are the worst ones because they produce hormones that wreak havoc throughout your body and affect your brain. But a lot of times you can't lose that last few pounds because those fat cells are full of heavy metals. And if you test to identify those heavy metals and get on a program to flush those heavy metals out, now your body doesn't need those fat cells anymore to store, to keep them out of circulation. You get rid of the toxic heavy metals, you don't need those fat cells anymore, you lose that weight. I've seen that many, many, many times with people. Fatigue. Fatigue is never caused by one thing, it's always caused by a half a dozen things. But anytime somebody's fatigued for no reason, like they've suddenly just had a comparative lack of energy now compared to 2 years ago, 5 years ago, with no explanation, they didn't do anything different, they didn't expose themselves to anything, they haven't been sick, they just have low energy for no reason. Heavy metals, chemical, and mold toxins are always part of the picture with a patient like that. Getting those things flushed out makes all the difference. That 35-year-old man I talked about earlier also had significant fatigue. He just wasn't barely able to do his job, and that all went away after about, went away significantly after about 3 months and went away completely after about 6 months on a program to help flush out the heavy metals. So one last patient I love talking about had a 70-year-old man who was having memory loss. His wife especially noticed it. And that's very difficult. I've got several episodes on dementia, Alzheimer's. Look at my podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. My past episodes are on YouTube. They're on my website, binkleyhealingcenter.com. And if you go to any of those places, please like my podcast there and share it with someone. Leave a comment and tell others. I appreciate that. Get the message out. So this 74-year-old man with memory loss, it wasn't terrible, and that was the reason it worked. So he didn't have significant memory loss. He was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, which is, early signs of some dementia. And I put him on a high dose of fish oil, some other basic nutrients, and we did testing for heavy metals. And after he'd been tested for that before, it kind of happened at the same time. We'd already tested him for heavy metals for other reasons. And when his wife noticed that the signs of the memory loss were sort of becoming more noticeable, we were already on his second test for metals, flushing more metals out. More were coming out. And so we adjusted some of his dosages on things and continued. And about 6 months to a year later, we dramatically proved that his body burden of toxic heavy metals was dramatically lower. And his wife noticed a significant difference in his memory loss, his forgetfulness, and the other signs that you always see in a situation like that. So she was very happy. We dramatically reduced his signs at a late age, which is very difficult to do. So everybody's different. It's not a slam dunk. Not everyone who reduces their body burden of heavy metals is going to reverse memory loss, but they might. It's always something we look for. If you have it, it's definitely worth doing, because it often does help. I'm Dr. Todd Binkley. You've been listening to Safe, Effective, Natural Solutions. As a reminder, most of the conditions I talk about on this show are caused by stress and identifiable nutrient deficiencies, identifiable on tests, by insufficient good food, by insufficient moving of your body, and general neglect. So if you want to be truly healthy, you have to take responsibility for your own health, but you do not have to do it on your own. I am here to help. I'd be honored to help you restore health and longevity. So a loved one of yours that's having one of these conditions, send me your conditions, your questions about various conditions. I love helping people with questions, providing information that you can use to take control of your health and live long and live well. Tune in here next Friday at 4 p.m. and check out my past episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and my website, binkleyhealingcenter.com. Remember, do something today to be a little healthier than you were yesterday. Go for a walk. Eat some more fresh vegetables. Call your mother or your brother or your granddaughter or that friend that you haven't spoken to in years. When you forgive someone, that is for your benefit, not theirs. It is to reduce your stress. But of course, it probably will benefit them as well. Have an awesome weekend. I look forward to speaking with you right here next Friday at 4 p.m.
You've been listening to Safe, Effective, Natural Solutions with Dr. Todd Binkley. If you have a health question you want discussed on the show, email your health questions to Dr. Binkley at binkleyhealingcenter.com. Take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions for yourself and for your loved ones, because our health matters. Join him next Friday at 4 p.m. for safe, effective natural solutions right here on 98.3 The Word, KDAR.